Welcome back. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now. Today's topic is how to overcome script writing in the course of recovery. As always, very much welcome your questions and comments. Would love to hear whether it's on topic or not. Please use this time as a resource. How can I be helpful to you? What kind of questions do you have about your recovery? So, script writing, very common stuff. It's an anxious behavior, and it's something that we see for people who are in recovery, for people, lots of folks who have never had a substance use disorder also engage in script writing. It's one of the hardest pieces of unlearning that exists for us, because for most of us growing up, we learn to anticipate how things will unfold. We learned hypervigilance as a survival skill, and we're used to having to intuitively or otherwise sense how events are likely to pan out. So because we have so much experience living with unknowns, whether that was growing up or whether that was in the course of where addiction took us, we became very fear-based, very shame-based, and very pessimistic. So when we find that we're living with unknowns or fearful about how events are likely to play out, we start writing a script in exactly the way that a playwright would. We think about the people that are involved in this, and we make predictions about how they're likely to act, the kind of things that they're likely to say, and we plan out all of our responses. And I've never yet seen a script that had a positive ending. It's almost entirely things get bad and then they'll get worse, which will lead to something else, and then by the time we're done writing the script, it's like we're all going to die for no good reason. And so the key to overcoming this is to be present and to be patient and to let events unfold. I typically hear from people that they're waiting for the other shoe to drop and that they're preparing for it. And so my experience is that shoes drop whether we're waiting on them or not. And my experience with people, especially in early recovery, is that when we get tired of waiting for shoes to drop, we start throwing shoes. We start pushing people, places, and things because we want to get it over with. We don't like living with unknowns, and we hate living with anticipation or anxiety. And so we start pushing, usually subconsciously, to make the outcomes that we're anticipating come true. And so this is all about control. This is all about how we cope with fear. And there's a distinction that I point out sometimes between people who are in recovery and people who aren't. So people who live with chronic anxiety tend to write scripts, and when the negative predictions that they've made don't come true, they experience maybe 5-10 seconds of relief, and then they go on to worrying about the next thing, because that's what chronic anxiety does. We live with those fears. We engage in a lot of worrying about things that we have no control over. By contrast, people in recovery, oftentimes, instead of feeling relieved when all of the negative outcomes we predicted don't come true, we get angry because we've put so much time and so much energy into preparing for something that failed to occur or just never even came to pass. And so it's a quirky little thing that, if you look at it the right way, is kind of funny. But all of this underscores the need to just stay in today and to be able to allow things to unfold. This is not something that we tend to excel at. We tend to be very impatient people, and we find it very hard to be optimistic. We tend to say things like, I'm hoping for the best, but I'm preparing for the worst. And I would suggest that it's impossible to do both of those simultaneously. I tease my clients sometimes that it doesn't cost me anymore to be optimistic. In fact, having hope or faith that things will be okay and maybe even turn out well affords me a greater perspective. Sorry. I'm going to pause just for a moment while my dogs are barking. Looking forward to being back in my office next week. So again, having the patience for things to unfold, having faith that things will be okay. And I'm very blessed because what my experience has taught me is that no matter what I'm going through, sooner or later things are going to be okay. And if I have to go through a learning experience or a time of adversity, that sooner or later I'm going to come out on the other side of that better than I've ever been, with more knowledge and skills, and hopefully with some growth in my spirituality. So these are some of the benefits that I experience. But when folks find that they just can't break their way out of writing scripts in their head, one of the things that I'll suggest to them is that they write them down on paper. Everything looks different on a computer screen or on paper than it does in our head. Unfortunately, this is still a warehouse for bad ideas, and if I'm coming from a place of fear, I can easily create problems that don't even exist. I can try to predict the future, and what I find most commonly is that when we're coming from a place of fear and we're looking at our current situation or circumstances, how we expect things to play out isn't based on what's happening today. It's not even based on the people that are in our lives today. Our expectations are a product of past experience. And so what we often find is that this negative or pessimistic view that we have isn't based on anything in the present, but is simply based on our past experiences. I'm fond of saying that one of the very last things that a person in recovery changes are their expectations. We still have this fear, this sense that things that have plagued us or been difficult for us in the past have to continue. It's this form of deja vu that we expect, and we just anticipate things not based on who people in our lives are today, not based on any of the ways in which we've changed and grown, but based on how things have played out in the past. This happens pretty commonly when we feel like we've regressed or taken a step back, when we feel like we've failed or disappointed someone. And it's something I've encountered a lot as a therapist and as a coach, especially when a person is afraid that they've let me down, or maybe they've relapsed and they're expecting that I'll be angry at them. And I'll say, look, I don't change because you get drunk. I was supportive of you through whatever phase you were in, whether that was active addiction or early recovery, and I'm not here to judge you. But when we're in that place of shame or fear, we tend to project. We decide that we know better than others how they should think of us. We decide that we're mind readers, and very often I'll have someone say to me, I know what you're thinking, or I know where you're going with this, and I'll laugh and say, really? Because I don't. I'm in the moment, I'm open to all possibilities, and I want to work on making things better. But before we can do that, we have to break out of these self-limiting perspectives, and again, we have to move away from waiting for the other shoe to drop. Shoes are going to drop whether we're waiting or not, and what I've learned about preparation is that it's largely a myth. If there are things within your control that you can reasonably do something about, great, do that. But most often when we're worrying or living with anxiety, what we're really focused on are things that we have no control over. These are areas of powerlessness. These are opportunities for spiritual growth, and they're most notably times and places where we need to be reaching out for support, because two heads aren't twice as good as one. They're a million times better than one. We need to have that active support. We need to have a lot of reality checks based on, am I looking at this the right way? Is there something I'm overlooking? Do I have some blinders on here? All of us have blind spots, and they're most commonly a product of things that I can't see or things that I'm not willing to see. So when I have an active support system, I can reality check with the people that I trust and allow myself to be vulnerable with and say, look, here's my take on what's happening and what I think is likely to occur. And I can be open to challenges for that. I can be open to folks saying to me, well, I see things very differently, or perhaps they view some opportunities that I'm not seeing. Gonna pause real quick just to check the feeds that we're on today, and would love again to hear from you questions or your experience, strength, and hope. What would you like to know more about? Would love to answer questions. Okay, Kathy Overman. I always love when your talks pop up. Oh, thank you so much. That's nice to hear. Happy to be listening. Very happy to have you with me. And I always forget to mention, if you're watching this stream long after the fact, please drop me a comment. Let me know what was helpful. Let me know kind of things that you'd like to hear more about in the future. Always want to make these streams interactive and get a sense of what are the things that are most helpful to you. When I think about script writing, I always associate it with page 417 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the greatest things that I've ever read, is the discussion of acceptance and the impact that has on the manageability of our lives, the impact that it has on our spiritual development. And one of the quotes from 417 is, Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." He forgot to mention that I was the chief critic. I was always able to see the flaw in every person, every situation, and I was always glad to point it out. So being a critic is an easy thing to do, and I think we are our own worst critics. We are our own worst enemies. And when we're engaging in unhealthy coping like script writing, what we're really doing is making ourselves more afraid. We engage in the what if questions. So what if this thing that I'm concerned about goes wrong, and then what would that lead to, and then what would that lead to? And our thought process gets perpetuated to the point of finding a fear that is absolutely debilitating or absolutely paralyzes us. And so what we could sooner do is take those what if questions and answer them as they arise. We could simply look realistically at what's happening today, and again, separating what do I have control over and what don't I? What can I do to make this situation better? And who could I share this script with? And be open to some feedback about that. These are some of the keys to getting out of our own way. These are some of the keys to having greater serenity and acceptance of what's happening in the here and now. Again, really vital that we examine the expectations that drive our mindset, and those can be hard to identify. Expectations are vitally important because they guide so much of our choices and so much of our behavior. I was talking with some people in recovery recently about the basis for our decision making, and what I've said to an awful lot of folks is that too often we make decisions based on how things feel, which is arguably the worst possible way to make a decision. Ideally, my choices are based on things like beliefs and values. Ideally, they're based on logic or rational thought. They can be based on my intuition, my conviction. They can be based on things that are not only really important to me, but are things that aren't really subject to change. How I feel is subject to change from moment to moment. And so if I make decisions based on that, I can't trust that the way I'm seeing things is necessarily valid, and I certainly can't trust that the choices I'm making are going to yield the outcomes that are healthy for me, are sustainable for me. This is, again, all of this relates to script writing because what we're doing is allowing fear to dictate our perception and our choices, and it's one more time in which I'm trying to run the show as opposed to allowing my higher power to guide me, as opposed to allowing the people that most support me to be present and be there for me and help me to get back into today. Maintaining a healthy perspective and learning how to get that perspective back when we're triggered, when we're in a place of fear, is absolutely vital, and it's a hard thing to learn. What I've noticed, especially in people in early recovery, is that if your day's kind of gone rough by 8:30 in the morning, there's this tendency to say, well, okay, now the whole day has to suck. And this is a minor form of script writing, but it is still a prediction. It is still something that's based in negativity and our past experience. And so one of my favorite things to do is just ask folks, have you ever tried to just restart your day? Have you ever decided that, okay, this isn't panning out well, I got up on the wrong side of the bed, I had a shitty attitude, so let me just take pause. As simple as that concept is, it's amazing to me that we can learn to respond and not react. We can take even just a minute. We can even, if things are bad at work, if things are bad at home, my suggestion, pragmatically, as silly as it may sound to you, is head to the restroom. It's always socially acceptable to exit a situation and head to the men's room or the ladies' room and take just 5 minutes. Take pause, take some deep breaths, get control of your body back, make sure that you're feeling safe in your body, in your environment, and then ideally, a little bit at a time, that's going to yield better thinking, better decision making, better problem solving. But the piece that most often gets overlooked is simply coping. What can I do right now that's going to help me to feel more safe, more stable, more secure? What can I do right now so that I'm making conscious decisions and not simply reacting? Script writing is a reaction. It's a reflex. Something is happening in my life that I view as unacceptable or that I view as potentially having a negative impact on my life. And so when I'm script writing, I'm looking for a way to control it. I'm looking for a way to manipulate it, a way to at least have some influence over it. And these are all times in which I'm refusing to accept powerlessness. I'm trying to assert that the things that I think are best should happen, and its self-will run riot, as my friends in recovery say. So ideally, we're going to move away from anticipation and towards just managing what's in the here and now. Ideally, we're going to be able to offer ourselves reassurance and seek it from others. The value of that really can't be overstated. Shirley, thank you for writing in. Acceptance is so important. I agree completely, and I often encourage folks to read. Again, it's 417 in the big book. It starts out with, and acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, or thing unacceptable to me, and I can find no serenity until I've essentially come to acceptance, to paraphrase. One of the most concise and powerful passages I've ever read, and I have absolutely found it to be true. Too often, in my life, I have found that what I need to come to acceptance of is something that I find to be unacceptable. And so I go back to step one. I go back to what do I have control over and what don't I? And the things that I'm powerless over are things that have to be surrendered to my higher power. And that's always, or not always, for a very long time that was hard for me. It was hard to have faith in a higher power. It was hard to trust that the things that I turn over and let go of would be things that my higher power would take care of. And I came to a pretty good place with that by reconciling that whether I surrender them or not, whether I trust my higher power or not, I still can't control those outcomes. I can't control those people, places, and things. And in truth, when I'm in good space, I don't want to control anything. Being in control of me is more than a full-time job. And on my best days, I'm not truly in control of me. My higher power is. And I want for my choices, my actions, my statements to be things that are directed by my higher power. When I'm open to allowing the universe to work through me, everything goes better. And more possibilities become apparent to me. More will be revealed, as we say in recovery. So just another quick check here for comments. I would love to hear, how did you move away from script writing? What are the times and places where you still find yourself struggling with it? Again, always welcome your comments. Let's see. Kathy, thank you for writing in again. How do you, excuse me, how do you help resistant clients to buy into the changing the script? My approach is to encourage them to make the script overt. So write it out, or at least describe it to me, and then I'm going to challenge using what a therapist would call a rational emotive technique. Most folks, I think, if they're familiar with therapy, hear a lot about things like cognitive behavioral therapy. They might hear a little bit about dialectical behavioral therapy. But I like eclecticism, and I think the best healers, the best coaches, the best therapists will use a little bit of everything and tailor it to the person before them. So when I use the rational emotive approach, what I'm doing is helping the person I'm serving to contrast what is it that your head's telling you, what is it that your heart's telling you. And so the rationality, of course, is your mind, but especially for those of us in recovery, and again, recovery from substance use disorder, recovery from trauma, from mental illness, eating disorders, all of the destructive things that people like me do to ourselves. When we contrast the difference between the head and the heart, what we find oftentimes is that our hearts have hijacked our minds. We find something too painful to accept, or something is too fearful to be faced in a healthy way, and that's what drives the script writing. So one of the very basic tools that I try to apply to everyone I serve is to separate what do you know in your head, what do you feel in your heart, and what do you sense from your gut. If we can table the emotion just long enough, and I mean literally for a minute, to get a sense of what is it I know about this situation, what is it I know about my resources, what is it I know has worked for others, then I can access those things. And what I then encourage people to do is to get your head and your gut on the same page. And again, 2 minutes. It's hard to put that emotion aside, especially when fears are running high. It's hard to move away from shame. But what we're really looking to do is to get on the same page with ourselves and involve other people in this process, again, so that they can point out our blind spots, the faults in our thinking, so that they can point out possibilities for solutions that we may not have considered, and more than anything else, to help us cope with the fear. When we expose fear, it loses power over us. Our perception broadens, and we're coming from the safer we feel, the more calm we feel, the more optimal our thinking is, the more we can access our intuition and follow where it leads. And my experience too is that what I know intuitively and what I know spiritually are intimately connected. I joke with my clients that I still don't get emails from my higher power. I still don't see billboards that's like, Jim, go this way. I have an intuitive sense, and I experience a million coincidences that I am convinced are not coincidences. So my higher power speaks to me through my intuition, but my higher power more often speaks to me through other people, through kindred spirits, through folks who are committed to spiritual growth. And the more that I surround myself with such folks, the better everything runs, because I, again, am practicing acceptance of powerlessness. I'm ensuring that my time and energy go into things that I can control, and everything just works a lot better when I do that. So if you find that script writing is a challenge for you, my suggestion is that there's probably some underlying anxiety. For folks who are in recovery, anxiety is extremely common. For a lot of us, that is connected to past trauma or even post-traumatic stress disorder. For a lot of us, that is tied to being an adult child of an alcoholic, or simply growing up in such a way that we learned unhealthy ways to cope. We learned that certain emotions, or maybe even all negative emotions, should not be shown, expressed, or treated as important in terms of how we care for ourselves. So again, recovery is very often a process of unlearning, even more than it is a process of learning. So, going to wrap up in just a minute here, but if any last minute questions, I would welcome those. I want to encourage you to do a couple of things for me, because if you watch live streams, if you listen to vlogs, folks are always appealing for some help in overcoming those algorithms on Facebook and on YouTube, and I would love your support in doing that. So if you head over to YouTube, Sober Now has a channel, about 110, 115 videos there, completely free. Would love to have you just click on the subscribe button for Sober Now, and you'll get notified when new live streams are coming up. We do those once a week. It'll notify you when new vlogs get added, which we do quite often. And want to share with you, if you're not already aware, SoberNow.com is my website. We recently moved to a monthly subscription service, so this is more affordable than it's ever been. Under $15 a month will get you access to both of our home study programs, one for those who are seeking recovery from substance use disorder, and a separate program for those who are affected others like me. Folks who have loved ones in active addiction or maybe early recovery, exploring the ways in which, of course, addiction, substance use disorder impacts the entire family. It affects all of us who know and love someone in active substance use. So those resources and a whole lot of exclusive content are available for $15. Complete confidentiality, complete anonymity, and would love to have you check those out. Our goal is to provide a service for folks who maybe can't afford treatment, maybe risk some harm to their careers by virtue of getting diagnosed. So these are some great starting points to get you on your way between where you are and where you want to be. Okay, gonna do one last question. Thank you, Shirley. What about people trying to control me? How can I show them that they can't? It's me that has to want to change. This is a clear-cut place where we need boundaries, and very often the fear of conflict or the fear of hurting the person who we might recognize as having good intentions is what stops us. So my suggestion to folks is express gratitude and recognize positive intentions and name them, and feel free to say to folks, here's what I'm willing to do and here's what I'm not. Here's what I'm ready to do, here's what I'm not. And you can do that very succinctly. I remind folks quite often, you don't owe anybody an explanation. No one has a right to know these things about you. Boundaries are very often uncomfortable for people like me to set, because they are by their very nature an act of being protective of self, which is not what we're used to. What we're used to is being protective of others and aware of their wants, needs, and feelings, but to a far lesser extent are we aware of our own needs, our own feelings, and we have to be ready and willing to allow others to help with that. So I hope that's helpful to you, and I hope that you'll connect with me. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to do that. Drop me a quick email. If you have questions regarding recovery of any kind, I'm happy to answer them. If you have topics that you'd like to see covered in future live streams, I would love to hear about those. So please take excellent care of you. These are trying times, and you deserve to have a life second to none. So please be good to yourselves, each other, and drop me a line. Let me know how I can help.